Hi, and welcome to my Boozy Reviews. And today I'll be ranking the Friday the 13th movies from worst to best. Now, seeing that my first video was a review of the 1980 original, it won't come as any surprise that I'm a fan of the Friday the 13th franchise. So I wanted to make a video ranking all 12 films. So without further ado, here are the rankings. Coming in number 12, Jason X. Now I admit I didn't watch this film until recently, and on the first watch, I thought it was the worst film I'd ever seen. And I've seen a lot of terrible films. After watching it a second time, I did warm up to it a bit more, and appreciate it for what it was. Sort of campy and terrible, but so bad it's kind of actually good. Believe it or not, from what I read, this is the least worst idea the producers had. Things like Jason the Hood and Jason the Snow, so Space Station didn't seem so bad. I think the problem was they tried to copy James Cameron's Aliens movie, but instead of a xenomorph, it was Jason. Which is ironic because the original Alien film by Ridley Scott was more of a slasher flick, and Sigourney Weaver ended up being like the Vinyl Girl. Overall, like I said, I don't hate it, but coming in last place is exactly what Jason X deserves.
It's okay, he just wanted his machete back!
Coming in at number 11, Jason Goes to Hell. This was actually the first Friday film I got to see in theaters way back in 1993. I was so excited, even after watching Part 8, and needless to say, I was extremely disappointed. I read that moving from Paramount to New Line would reinvigorate their series, and a lot of Part 8's failings were blamed on Paramount and lack of budget. Well, instead we got Jason the Demon Slug possessing bodies, and chasing Ryan from Friday the 13th the series, and his sister, niece, cousin, who was Wilma from Buck Rogers. But hey, I guess that's what you get for putting a 23-year-old newbie director in charge of a movie. In some ways it was a fight to the bottom between this and Jason X. But Jason Goes to Hell just edged it out a little bit. Part of it's nostalgia, because it was the first Friday the 13th movie I saw in theaters, and it also had a teaser for Freddy vs. Jason, which I thought will come out any time now, but then took a whole decade to come out. But hey, at least it ended up being better than Jason Goes to Hell and Jason X, but not by much. Coming in at number 10, Friday the 13th, Part 8. Surprisingly, this isn't the bottom of the list. I mean, if you're doing just the Paramount films, then it's definitely at the bottom. And you could even argue that Jason X and Jason Goes to Hell is better than this. But he's still OG Jason. He's just a walking corpse instead of being a slug or a cyborg. So while it's called Jason Goes to Manhattan, this is more like Jason takes a ferry and then eventually makes it to Vancouver with one or two scenes in actual Manhattan. And for some reason, the A's was obsessed with toxic waste transforming people. Like, instead of killing them, it's like, oh my god, you got toxic waste on you. Instead of you're dead, it's, oh, you're a mutant. Or, okay, now you're a superhero. But I mean, there were some good kills in this movie, so that's why it's like circling the drain instead of being right at the bottom. Coming in at number 9, Friday the 13th, Part 7. There's a reason why my rankings seem to be going in chronological order. It's because the sequels just seem to get worse and worse as it went along. Oddly, this is supposed to be a Freddy vs. Jason crossover. But they couldn't make things work with New Line, so they just decided to have Jason versus Carrie. Alternatively, this movie's been called Friday the 13th because a lot of the actors were gay in real life, and they tried to blame the lack of chemistry between the main girl and the love interest on it. But the acting's so subpar from everybody, how can you even tell? Still, Jason is generally scary looking, without looking soggy like he did in Part 8, and the kills that weren't gutted by the MPA were actually pretty good. Overall, this wasn't the worst of the Friday the 13th films, and I think actually if they worked on the story, it might have not been that bad, because it was an interesting premise. Coming in number 8, Friday the 13th, the 2009 reboot. I'm not the biggest fan of the reboot, and I felt like it made Jason into more of a generic killer hillbilly. He basically seemed derivative of the movies that ripped off Friday the 13th, so it's like he's a copy of a copy of a copy. That being said, the acting was slightly better than the usual Friday the 13th movie, and there were little Easter eggs and callbacks to fans that are kind of cool to see. I mean, it was trying to adapt Part 1 to 4, so it wasn't trying to be something it wasn't, and you kind of have to appreciate that. I think this was made by Michael Bay's Platinum Dunes company, and you can kind of tell because it has that Michael Bay slickness to it. I think actually the original's lack of budget actually helped them. There was a cheap grittiness to them that actually added to the atmosphere and the scariness. Coming in number 7, Freddy vs. Jason. While this isn't a great film, it did an okay job trying to mix Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street's different styles. Let's face it, it was just fun to see who would come out on top when they had the big fight. And in the end, I think Jason won. It was hard to tell. I mean, obviously left it up in the air for a sequel that, of course, will never happen. Jason's Fearwater didn't really make any sense as he's never had it in any of the movies. I mean, he drowned, but he's been underwater before. Overall, I think it's the best you expect from a team-up movie, especially in the early 2000s. And I think the best word to sum up the movie is serviceable.
Welcome to my world, bitch!
Coming in number 6, Friday the 13th, Part 6. Now I'm kind of surprised Part 6 ranks so high on my list. I've had a bit of a grudge against this movie since the late 80s. A lot of people pointed to Part 5 as the decline of the series, but for me it was Part 6. Jason was now a supernatural being, which completely changed the tone of the series for me. I mean, the comedy seemed to be played up more, and the kills just felt more cartoony. I mean, that could have been the MPAA trying to get them to tone down the realness of the kills. That being said, the plot and the pacing aren't that bad, and even the acting isn't that terrible. Also, the Jason first half is thick. Too bad he got replaced because they said he was too chubby to play Jason. See, I probably would love this movie more if they kept thick Jason. So I've definitely grown to appreciate it more over the years.
So, what were you gonna be when you grew up?
Coming in number 5, Friday the 13th, Part 3. Okay, this is a hard one because I do like this movie. It genuinely scared me when I was younger, and the score is a lot more intense than later films. I almost feel like the movie itself deserves to be a bit higher, but the acting at times is so laughable, and the side story implying Jason sexually assaulted Chris is kind of icky. Also, why do we spend so much time with the first couple who dies, other than them putting stuff in the camera to show us it's 3D? It just felt so unnecessary. The 3D is fun, but some parts literally made me feel like I'm going cross-eyed. But that may be just the DVD version I watched. And even though it's coming in number 5, it has one of my favorite scenes. Coming in number 4, Friday the 13th, Part 4. Honestly, in some ways I actually like Part 3 better than Part 4, but the end of the movie with Jason chasing Trish and Tommy killing Jason, and the Tom Savini gore effects are what pushes this up higher. Aside from the Jarvis family, the other kids are pretty useless, other than being potential victims, and they either have almost no personality, and the bit they do have is fairly irritating. I admit they do set up Sarah to be the final girl, but I knew she was a goner as soon as she had sex with her boyfriend. You know what they say, once you have sex, you're dead. Kind of like Part 3, if you take away the bad acting and the fact the plot is just basically a slight rework of the past 3 movies, then it's actually not that bad a film. And the Jason Part 4 is pretty scary. I mean, that one scene where he just explodes the door down, it's like, oh shit. Coming in number 3, Friday the 13th, Part 5. Now I know this movie gets a lot of crap, and some of it is well deserved, but it's still one of my favorites. I know putting this at number 3 and Friday the 13th Part 6 at number 6 is fighting words, but I don't care. I mean, the acting isn't that bad, and I like that they did try to do something a little different. And I do like how the actor played Tommy in this, because he legitimately does seem like he's going to go psychotic at any moment. And yes, I know it's not the real Jason, but besides that, I feel like this is a pretty competent Friday the 13th film. Also, since the studios mandated that kills happen at least every 8 minutes, there wasn't a lot of room for like sloppy attempts at characterization, because something's always happening. Also, unlike Part 6, Tommy seems actually troubled, and it's believable that he screwed up from killing Jason as a kid. Honestly, they should have just made him the killer, which I think was the original intention, instead of hinting at it and then revealing it was Roy Burns all along.
You talking to me, Sheriff? Huh? Oh, I thought you was talking to me.
Coming in number 2, Friday the 13th, Part 2. Sure, they basically copied the same formula from the first film and just added some plot twists. But at least the characters felt a little more fleshed out than the original, and they attempted to explain Jason, though that he's avenging the death of his mom, who died avenging his death, is basically a paradox, is kind of glossed over. Even though Potato Sack Jason isn't scary and seems a little weak compared to later films, I think the kills are well done and the chase scene is intense. And the finale where Ginny pretends to be Pamela is super creepy. And you kind of actually feel a bit bad for Jason. And as a final girl, I actually really like Ginny, is that she not only survives Jason, but kind of outwits him. But of course it leaves that eternal question, where's Paul? Was the ending a dream? A delusion? Who knows?
Paul? Where's Paul?
Coming in number 1, Friday the 13th, the 1980 original. How could this not be number 1? It's the one that started it all. True, the movie is low budget, and there's only the barest amount of characterization, but there's a lot of tension, and you genuinely feel bad to see these kids get killed off. It's Betsy Palmer that really elevates the movie though. Going back and forth between fairly normal and batshit crazy, you realize just how screwed up she really is. Also, the Tom Savini gore effects are extremely realistic, and were mostly left intact since the MPAA wasn't that strict, although they did make up for it in later films. And this may not seem a scary movie 40 years later, but when I saw the edited for TV version of this, and I only saw like the first half hour, it scared the absolute shit out of me. If you agree with me, or disagree with me, or want me to turn them on location so you can fight me, let me know in the comments. And as ever, stay boozy.